Understanding ASD. This will be session number 3, and we will be focusing on sensory processing today. This session is brought to you by Sheffield Adult Autism and Neurodevelopmental Service, and we will be presented by myself, Jonathan, an assistant psychologist. So as usual, we will start with a recap of the second session. We will then go on to the presentation regarding sensory processing. So I'll be giving you more information about your sensory profiles, as well as some coping strategies you could put in place to help with any sensory sensitivities you may be having. And then we will finish off with a conclusion and what to expect at the next session. So starting with a recap of the previous session, we were looking at anxiety. So a little bit more about what anxiety is, how it affects you, as well as some coping strategies you can put in place to help combat any anxiety. Some of those examples included physical activity, social activity, creating predictability, and relaxation exercises. So, on to today's presentation, sensory processing and autism spectrum disorder. So there are 5 senses that everyone has: sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell. And being on the autistic spectrum, your processing of these senses might be quite different to the neurotypical population. So for example, you might be quite overly sensitive or undersensitive to any of these senses. But we also have some lesser known senses that aren't as commonly understood. These are called vestibular, proprioception, and interoception. And we'll be talking about those in the next few slides. But just starting with the 5 well-known senses, how can these be impacted by being autistic? So in regards to sight, if you are quite oversensitive to seeing things, you might notice that you really struggle with certain lighting, for example, bright lights or unnatural lights, and therefore you might wear sunglasses or prefer to spend time in rooms that are lit a bit less brightly. Touch is a really common one. So you might notice that you have certain textures that you just really don't like the feel of. That could be things like clothing or food. But there might also be certain textures that you really like, potentially something quite soft. In regards to hearing, you might notice that you've got a very sensitive ear and you can hear things that other people around you haven't been able to pick up on. Or you might really struggle with your hearing and not be able to pick out on sounds. Or maybe even struggling to modulate, so struggling to identify different sounds if there's quite a lot of different things going on. In regards to taste, you might find that you prefer sort of blander tasting foods, or you might find that you really like something that's strong tasting, such as a curry. And in a similar vein, smell. You might notice that you've got a very sensitive nose and that you can smell things that other people around you generally haven't picked up on. Or you might have a very poor sense of smell. And all these senses and their sensitivities are really individual to you but they can also change over time and in different situations. So you might find, for example, if you're feeling really, really stressed, then you're particularly sensitive to hearing and you really struggle with all the noise that might be going on around you. So those are the 5 general senses. So let's talk about the ones that are a bit lesser known. So firstly is vestibular. So vestibular is the sense that tells you that your body is moving. So it responds to changes in the position of your head. It tells you about balance and movement and gravity, and essentially coordinates the movement of the eyes and the head and body. So if you are very sensitive and have a sensitive vestibular sense, you might find that you struggle with your balance or start to find things quite dizzy or feeling quite dizzy. Whereas if you are undersensitive, you might really struggle with your body coordination. So for example, picking something up from the side without looking at it is something that people who struggle with their vestibular are unable to do sometimes. The next one is proprioception. So this is very much around receptors in our joints. So there are proprioceptive receptors in all of our joints and muscles, as well as our tendons and our ligaments. And our unconscious awareness of these sensations tell us where our body and limbs are positioned in space. So for example, you might notice that you bump into things a bit more frequently because you struggle to know exactly where your body is in space and in a room. And then the final one is interoception. So this is a sense that gathers all the information about what is happening inside your body and motivates us to do something to change that. So for example, feeling hungry. So if your body tells you that you're feeling hungry, it motivates you to go and find some food. If you have quite a sensitive interoception sense, you might notice that you feel those pangs of hunger really intensely. You might feel pain and have a very low pain threshold. So things that, for example, don't usually cause pain to neurotypical people could potentially cause a bit more pain to you. So for example, taking a shower, you might find that sensation quite painful on your back and your shoulders. Also things such as understanding whether you are full, understanding whether you're feeling quite sick or need the toilet or feeling nauseous can also be quite difficult. And sometimes you might have a very different pain threshold. So we've spoken about being very sensitive to pain, but if your interoception sense is not as strong, so maybe you're undersensitive, you might have a very high pain threshold and therefore you don't feel pain as much as other people. And that sounds like it could be a positive thing. However, if you do know this is true for you, it's just really important that you're careful. So for example, if you have a very low pain threshold, you might start doing things such as taking something out of the oven without using oven mitts because you don't feel the pain, but you still might get some physical damage on your hands. So just to be careful when trying to understand your own sensory senses and whether your thresholds are high or if they're low. And I've been giving examples of both of the different sensory profiles. So why don't we talk a little bit about what they are? So the first one is called hyposensitive. So this is when you're very under responsive to certain sensory stimuli. So you might find that you're more passive and find it difficult to engage in activity. You might be quite slow to respond to environmental cues, and therefore you might spend time seeking additional stimulation. So doing things so you can really gather those sensations, because naturally you don't feel it as often. And on the other hand, you might be hypersensitive or over-responsive. This means you might be more easily distracted. You may overreact or show quite extreme emotions, or you may actively avoid or block out certain sensory stimulation. So for example, avoiding going to town because it might be very, very busy and there's a lot of noise, or avoiding the sunshine and wearing sunglasses at quite regular times, or spending time in darker rooms. But you also might find that you've got problems with sensory modulation. And that includes having difficulty tuning out irrelevant stimuli and trying to actually focus on something individual. So for example, if you're in a group conversation, trying to focus on that one person you might be having a one-to-one conversation with and ignoring the conversations of everyone else around you. You might struggle to know when to stop doing something, how much force to use, or even how much volume you might be using when speaking with other people. So you might be either over or under responsive, and therefore might be overly emotional or potentially even lacking much of an emotional response. So how does our individual sensory profiles impact the way that we behave? So if you are hyposensitive, so therefore you have difficulty registering sensations, that leads you to doing more sensory seeking behaviours. And if you're hyper responsive, so therefore very sensitive, it might lead to a lot more avoidance of sensory stimuli. And if you struggle and have poor sensory modulation, that might lead to a lot of swinging between avoidance and then seeking behaviours, which can therefore impact the way that we feel and lead to poor emotion regulation. So these are all tied together quite sensitively. So let's talk about some examples of sensory seeking behaviours that you might be doing. So this could be things such as fidgeting, doing quite a lot of scratching and biting, maybe flapping your hands or stimming. Might be quite active, so do quite a lot of running or jumping or spinning around. You might notice that you lean on things a bit more regularly. You might like touching objects. So when you see something new, you might like to feel it and find out what the texture is like. Might do things like hitting or potentially banging your head. So what about sensory avoiding behaviours? This could include things such as avoiding eating certain foods because you don't like the taste of them, you don't like the texture, maybe they're too crunchy or too soft or slimy, or maybe they're too physically hot or cold. You might struggle to brush your teeth or brush your hair, or potentially even have a shower or get in the bath because you just really can't stand that sensation on your skin. You might try to avoid being touched by other people, or maybe even certain materials, and therefore you might not want to wear certain clothing. If there are loud noises such as a police siren, you might find that you cover your ears because the sound is quite painful. You might wear a hood or a hat or some dark glasses to block out the sunshine, or in a lighter environment than your eyes can handle. And this might lead to you having quite poor motivation or avoiding physical activity, because going out into the world or going to certain places is just too sensory stimulating for you, and it's hard to cope with. So what actually helps? So self-regulation, so being able to regulate your own senses, can therefore lead to better emotion regulation. And essentially, it's about finding a fine balance between feeling really calm and alert. So these are different arousal levels that you might find that you have throughout your day. So up at the top is the red one. So that's when you have high arousal levels. So you're not feeling very calm. So you're feeling really, really alert, and you might be on edge. And at the bottom, more lower arousal levels. So not feeling alert enough, maybe feeling a little bit more sluggish. So it's really, really hard to maintain a perfect optimal balance. So in the middle is the green, and this is the optimal arousal levels. So if you look closely, you can see that there's a line that kind of goes up and down. So essentially it's about balancing being both calm and alert. So having a little bit of calmness in your life, and also making sure that you are occasionally doing things that will alert your body. If you spend too much time in the high arousal level, that's when you might start to feel really stressed out, agitated and anxious. Whereas you spend too much time at the low arousal level, that's when you can start feeling very unmotivated, tired, lack of energy, and potentially even low in mood. However, you can use your senses to self-regulate and really help you maintain that optimal balance. So let's go through some examples of some of the senses and what things that you could do to help regulate yourself. So starting with vestibular sense, you could be doing a lot of rocking, swinging, spinning or bouncing, cycling and running, and that really can help maintain optimal levels of vestibular. In regards to your vision, it might be good to look at particular photos or pictures. Maybe there's certain lighting or even colours that can really help with self-regulating. And quite a common example is being in nature. So actually going for a walk in the woodlands is quite relaxing. You could use your sense of smell to help regulate yourself. So there are soothing smells, so things like lavender or familiar smells and certain perfumes, and that can help calm you down. But there are also alerting smells, so something like citrus or mint is quite good at keeping people awake and alerting them. And similar to smell is taste, so there might be certain foods that can help calm you down, so certain comfort foods, maybe something that's warm, familiar, something that you just really like the taste of. And also the actual act of eating, so chewing or sucking something. And on the other side, there might be quite alerting things. So really strong tasting hot curries could make you feel quite alert, as well as maybe something that's really, really cold, like an ice cream. In regards to proprioception, you can self-regulate by using weights, doing resistant exercises, Pilates, yoga, or firm pressure. So for example, having a weighted blanket. And sounds is a really, really easy one to help you self-regulate. There are definitely more calming music as well as more alerting music. But you could also listen to something like white noise or nature sounds. Or if you're very sensitive to sound, then wearing headphones or earplugs might be a useful tip. And then finally, touch. So as I mentioned earlier, there might be certain fabrics or textures that you really like to touch, and they can help calm you down. If you have pets, they're really good at calming down, and they have a whole host of different furs and textures. Having a bath or a shower, getting massages, maybe having fidget toys can be quite good, as well as temperature. So you might find that warm temperatures really help calm you down, whereas cold temperatures really help alert you. And later on in the session, I'll talk about exactly how you can use your senses to self-regulate yourself throughout your week. So time for a bit of an exercise. So what sensory activities have you found calms you down specifically? I'd like you to take some time to consider this question and answer in your workbook, and this should be on page 25. If you're not really sure, the next few slides will give a few examples of different sensory activities you may have done in the past, or things that you could try to help calm you down. So pause here. So here are some examples of calming activities. So you could sit under a big heavy blanket, whether that's a weighted blanket or just a really thick duvet. Sometimes putting your hands on your head and pressing down and just feeling that pressure is quite calming. And if you like the feel of pressure in your body, you could also tuck your legs up and squeeze. Having deep pressure massages. Maybe doing some slow rocking, so in a rocking chair. You could stretch a TheraBand, which is an exercise band that you could put around your ankles or around your arms, or even use an elastic band around your wrist or a hair bobble. You could push against a wall, give yourself a hug, maybe use candles or certain scents that are quite soothing, like lavender. Making use and squeezing fidget toys. Maybe squeezing and then relaxing your face or your hands. Or maybe just snuggling into a small space, and that can help you feel quite calm and safe. There's also maybe sucking on a lollipop or a sweet, or sucking a yogurt or maybe a thick milkshake through a straw. Might be a good calming sensation. Going for a walk maybe with a backpack on to feel that heavy pressure, or doing some gentle exercising like press-ups. Allowing time to relax or chill out before and after you have to do a stressful activity. Maybe moving furniture around or doing heavy manual tasks, for example, gardening, going swimming, wearing a heavy coat or having a heavy blanket over your shoulders. And maybe even having a sensory room, a sensory corner, or a sensory box that you can go to or use at any point. And this could be something that you keep sensory objects in that can help calm you down. And that includes sensory toys, or maybe sort of squeezing or rocking against a gym ball. And now on the other side, I'd like you to think about what sensory activities that you find alerting. So again, please take the time to consider this and write any answers you have in your workbook on page 25. And if you're struggling to think of anything, there will be some examples again coming up. So now would be another good time to pause and focus on the activity. So some examples of alerting activities include doing short bursts of fast movement, so going for a quick jog or a run, or maybe doing some up and down movements, so jumping or doing jumping jacks. Doing things like clapping, or making faces or stomping your feet. Maybe sucking on a sour sweet, or eating something that's really crunchy or spicy. Maybe having an ice cold drink or having an ice lolly. And then also having citrus smells or flavors. So be that a candle or eating an orange. And today was an introduction to sensory issues. But if you have a big interest or want to find out more about this, there'll be quite a lot of information out there on the internet. There's also a few books that have been written specifically for autistic people. So these include a book called Too Loud, Too Bright, Too Fast and Too Tight by Sharon Heller. Sensory Perceptual Issues in Autism and Asperger's Syndrome. And Living Sensationally, so understanding your senses. So you can get these wherever you buy books. There's also some other places you can gather information around sensory differences. So the National Autistic Society has a website that has information about sensory experiences. And the Bristol Autism Support webpage has a teenager and adult section where topics related to sensory issues have been written by an autistic person. So you can find that by searching Bristol Autism Support and sensory issues on a search engine on the internet. So here is a strategy that you can use to help you stay calm and alert throughout your week. So this is particularly useful if you struggle a bit with your executive functioning and might have a hard time planning. So if we're able to get a diary, so you can either find one and print one out from the internet, you can create one yourself, or you can even use your computer or smartphone. And it's about making sure that throughout the day, you are engaging in activities that are both calming and alerting. And if you can fit in a few strategies throughout the day, that should hopefully allow you to stay at that optimum arousal level. So let's talk through this example. So this is a calendar, goes from Monday all the way through to Sunday. And then down the column is just some different activities that you might be able to do that can help calm you or alert you. So this person, for example, wakes up on a Monday morning and has a cup of tea, and that might relax this individual. And then they'll have a shower. And again, depending on the temperature, that might be quite relaxing if it's a warm shower, or if they need to feel quite alert, then they might have a cold shower. They go for a walk at lunchtime, especially if they are working. They might be in a stressful working environment. Going for a walk out in nature, if possible, might be quite calming. They have another cup of tea towards the end of the day. And then they might suck on a sweet on the drive home. So for example, a sour sweet might be alerting. So this is just one idea of something that you can do to stay calm and alert. And there is a copy of this on page 26, as well as a blank copy for you to create your own calendar. And we also have something called a self-soothe kit. So this is something that you can maybe use quite quickly to look at if you need some activities to help calm you down or alert you. And there's a blank copy of this on page 27 in your workbook. So it might be really, really useful for you to spend some time thinking about your senses and exactly what things calm and alert you, because this is going to be very individual. So for example, you might really enjoy nature. So therefore, in the visual part at the top of that self-soothe kit, you could put taking a walk in nature, or maybe watching a nature program, and that will calm you down. And then along by one to the right is auditory. So you might find that listening to classical music is quite calming. So you might put that in your self-soothe kit. But you also might find that listening to rock music or dance or electric music might be quite alerting. So therefore you'd put that in the self-soothe kit. So you can quickly take a look at it if you're in a situation where you just need to soothe yourself as quickly as possible and potentially your mind isn't working as quickly as you'd like, and you can just pick one sensory activity to do to help calm you down or alert you. So to conclude today's session, so having autism can bring a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to your sensory sensitivities. However, you can use these to your advantage and develop strategies that can help manage any of these. But it's really useful and important to consider what strategies work for you specifically. So take some time to really think about what calms you down, what energizes you, and try and build those into your life on a regular basis. So thank you for attending session 3. I hope you found today's session on the senses useful. And the next session, session number 4, will be on socializing and autism. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. Goodbye.